各位尊贵的来宾，女士们、先生们。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm really honored to invite so many distinguished guests to attend the 7th China and Globalisation Forum 2021. I'd like to present to you the moderator of the opening ceremony of the 7th China and Globalisation Forum 2021, Dr. Miao Lü. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, welcome to the 7th China and Globalisation Forum 2021.
And gentlemen, welcome to the 7th China and Globalisation Forum.
This event is being organized by China and Globalization Center, and we really want to thank the Contemporary China Institution and the Institution for the China's Talent, and we also want to thank the China United Nations Exchange Foundations, the Asia Foundations, the Keynote Staffing, and also Euro-Asia Centers, and also Herian Charitable Foundations. And we are also working together with a lot of medias, and they have cares about us and they kept reporting about us.
The Globalization Forum. 下面我们首先邀请
Now we'd like to present to you Mr. Wang Huiyao, the President of the CCG and Counselor of China State Council, to present us. Honorable Mr. Chen, distinguished guests, dear friends, good morning. Welcome to attend the 7th China and Globalization Forum 2021. China and Globalization Forum started from the year 2015, was being jointly organized by the CCG and also the International Exchange Centers and the MOFCOM. And we have continued our forum for 6 years consecutively, and this year marks the 7th China and Globalization Forum. And our forum has always been staked to the principles of professionalism, and we are trying to keep up with the tides of the globalizations, and we discuss the frontline issues, including the globalizations, and we invite the players and the participants of the political world and also the private sectors. In the yesterday's welcoming dinner, we have welcomed several thousands of the ambassadors, policymakers, stakeholders, and also representatives from Beijing municipal government, as well as the representatives from over 30 different international organizations, Chamber of Commerce, and also the head of the foundations. And we have also invited several different high-level executives of the multinationals to join our forum. And last night, we have welcomed and hosted a series of distinguished guests. We really want to thank all the relevant parties and the international society, and also all walks of life for your concern and for your support. The development of CCG and the achievement of CCG cannot be alienated from your support. I think that during our exploration, we are going to keep up with the tide of the times and going to work together with you in sincerity, and we are going to co-discuss and coordinate the friendly and mutual trust cooperations between each other. So today, we have kindly invited so many distinguished guests.
We are having a full day agenda. It's a very, very busy agenda. We're going to explore the first section. We're going to talk about the China and the global economic development and how we facing the pandemic. And also, second panel, we're going to have over 15 ambassadors to talk about the issues on the post-world economy and the pandemic development. Also, we're going to talk about China's new communication, a new narrative, and also new development of the business enterprise innovation and China-EU collaboration. And in the evening, we're going to have actually 4 major US think tank head. We have an online dialogue. 那我们看到目前的新冠疫情仍然
Currently, the COVID-19 pandemic is still wreaking havoc while we are facing the challenges for the climate change. That's the reason why there are so many uncertainties, internationally speaking. The world needs to be united and cooperated, and we need to protect the world from the COVID-19 while open our economies to each other. Especially, the virus is going to be coexisted with us for a long period of time. We need to figure out a way to keep the people-to-people exchange while protect ourselves from the virus. So I believe the 7th China and Globalisation Forum today, as you have seen, all the distinguished experts, guests, and leaders is going to share their valuable suggestions and opinions, and it is going to add the color for the future development of China and the world. Thank you. Thank you very much, General Secretary President Wang Huiyao. Now I'd like to present to you Mr. Chen Deming to deliver the keynote speech, who is the CCG's Honorable Chairman, former Minister of Commerce, and Chairman of CEFI. I'm going to remove my medical mask. Thank you very much. I also want to thank the Typhoon Yanhua. So I actually cannot arrive here if the typhoon has not left. Distinguished guests, dear ambassadors, your excellencies, distinguished experts, good morning. It is really an honor for me to gather here together with all of you in Beijing to attend the 7th China and Globalisation Forum 2021. The year 2021 is the year for the economic recovery in the post-pandemic era. And I believe the multilateralism is going to become one of the major keywords during the global games. And I also believe that in this centenary, we are facing unprecedented opportunities and challenges. As a country who have successfully managed the virus spreading for the first time, Chinese economy is gradually recovered. And on the first half of the year 2021, Chinese GDP is reaching $53 trillion. That is a 12.7% growth compared with last year. And the Chinese economy is demonstrating a very great resilience, injecting dynamism for the world, and it's also consolidated the confidence between China and the world economy. This year marks the 70th years anniversary for China to join the United Nations, and this is also the 20th year anniversary for China's reform and opening up. For China, this is a very special year. It is a year in the transitional period which we have undertaken the previous historic task while opening into the new chapter. Standing on this historic moment, China is determined to enhance the cooperations between the international community, while we are clear to see that there is a trend on the tide of anti-globalizations. Under this backdrop, how will China shoulder our responsibilities? How will China maintain the trend of globalizations and defend our own interest of development? I think for this problem, I'd like to see a few of my own opinions. The first one is about the international scenarios, international landscape. I have 4 points to share with you. The first point is that COVID-19 pandemic is still wreaking havoc around the world. Until yesterday, the cumulative confirmed cases across the world is 129 million cases. According to the data, United Nations, India, Brazil are the top 3 countries that have the most cases. According to the data from the WHO, the Delta mutations of the virus has been spread to 132 different countries and regions. According to the initiations and according to the statistics by GISAA, in the past 4 weeks, COVID-19 newly added cases across the world has demonstrated the ratio of Delta mutated infected virus is becoming over 90%. The virus is going to be a problem and question that is going to trigger the problems across the world. So how will each one of the country enhance their cooperations while they are facing the virus and the coming areas? This is actually a question we should discuss later. The second part is that the China and the U.S. relations is actually the most important ties across the world. Currently, the diplomatic relations has been under severe conditions. At the first half of this year, the China and the U.S. government has started 2 rounds of dialogue, both in Alaska and also in Tianjin. And both parties has also undertaken a huge dividends. The U.S. government cannot be accepting the Chinese requirement, and according to the economic part, and according to the Chinese General Customers, GECC, affected by the trade war, the bilateral trade volumes between China and the United States is actually reaching $4 trillion. That is a 47.5% growth year-on-year, and it's actually 12% of the total volumes for import and export in China. Although the problem existed, but the 2 countries' economy is still very complementary to each other, and we still have a very huge ground to work together. We are caught in politics while the economic exchange are very hard and robust. And the third problem we need to talk about is that China and Europe should build a dialogue mechanism instead of confrontations. And for the year 2020, China has become Europe's largest trading partner, surpassing the United States for the first time. And according to the data issued by European Union, the total trade volume of the European Union has been surpassing the total volume of $5 trillion. And after we have opened up the China-Europe's railway, every year it has actually carried around 5,000 tons of the investment. After 5 years, China and Europe has reached the China-Europe trade negotiations, but currently it was frozen, and we don't know when it will be unfrozen again. And as we understand, the nationalism in Europe is on the rise once again. So when will we resume the long-term cooperation is still going to be very important. So I think this is going to be meeting up with the root interest from both sides. The fourth part is that the multilateralisms and cooperations in the climate change, environmental protections, crackdowns on the terrorism, and also the tax havens is going to be a very important part. We are also going to work together with the space explorations, disaster relief, and also foreign aid. The developing countries and developed countries is going to join their hands and contribute their fair shares for the future development. However, the Trumpism is still spreading across the world, and the sense of security and safety is also changing. China has always becomes the target of the Western world. The nationalism has been affected by the political world. We cannot generate any single consensus yet, and the United States has openly violated the rules of the WTOs, and they have also given us through the malls at the China and The good news is that for the new General Secretary of WTO, they have already taken the office, and we are expecting that on the November this year, the 2nd or the 12th MCF, it is going to be a session to boost our confidence. I don't think that this is going to be a field annual event. If we want to promote the Chinese development, it needs to went through the trend of the world. Globalization is a must choice for China and the world. After 20 years of China's joining of WTO, it is going to be the best and solutions, and we are waiting through a long-term climbing period. This is not only because of the deteriorating of the global scenario, it is also because of our own structural reform and our own internal reform. We are also shifting the drivers of our economy, and we are also trying to prevent the financial meltdown in our country. We are also working together against climate change and environmental protection. So, as General Secretary Xi Jinping pointed out, China should go with the tide of times, and facing these risk scenarios, China is willing to fight each other, and we are going to contribute our fair shares to construct a socialism with Chinese characteristics, with a very good external environment. Firstly, we are going to made the dual circulation economy. China is a country with a huge population. The development of our economy is actually focused on the economic drives. We should change the economic drive from investment-driven to a consumption-driven. That's the reason why we need to lower down the job list problems in the companies, create more jobs, and keep international inter and outward balance. While we are trying to expand the expectations, we are going to meet up with the internal demand for enlarging the consumptions. And we also should need to maintain a very enough foreign exchanges. Currently, the export-related foreign reserves is being focused by the foreign invested companies and also Taiwan invested companies. That's the reason why we need to smooth the foreign investment, and we should build a negative list. Especially, we should open up the service in trade, and this is a long-term policy for the Chinese government. And recently, I understand the MOFCON has issued a series of the policies to open up the service in trade. And I think all of you should be concerned about the new rules and listed of the Chinese government. Secondly, we should use the fight as a method to treat with the China-US relations. In its nature, China is an emerging superpower, and the Chinese people has chosen the political system that suited their own national realities. And this political system has widely demonstrating its advantages. While in the United States, they are a superpower, dropping gradually from their supreme time to, and this is actually echoing with the pattern that we have understand about the lives of the countries. Over the past 20 years, the United States development has exposed many different risks and also the weakening points. But we should be fully aware that our country is going to be at the initial stage of the socialism for a long period of time. We need to stick to the old reform and open up.
We need to learn from other countries, and the United States will not collapse tomorrow. The cooperation with the United States is conducive to China's growth and prosperity, but we will not allow U.S. to limit our right to development. Actually, they cannot control us at all. There is competition between China and the U.S. Chinese businessmen hope there will be a multilateral rule for competition. We will fight if the rule is compromised. Number three, we need to deal with the alliance of the U.S. They want to control China with the U.S. at the back. We need to make plans to set the baseline and compromise with them and to persuade them. The alliance of the U.S. is very complex. They need to have the protection of security from U.S. and they need to deal with China for business, and their choice has to be controlled or influenced by their domestic politics. I think this is we see a lot of moving around from the alliance of U.S. So we need to tell a good story of China. We need to discuss the uh, the interest and the growth of countries. We need to talk less about ideology. Number four, we need to support multilateral institution organizations. If we want to talk about multilateralism, the principle should be justice and non-discrimination. For example, we need to restore the function of WTO appeal organization. We support the reform of the WTO, and we need to implement the reform opening up measures of China, and then we can have a large maneuver room for the reform of multilateralism. I think it is in the interest China should try its best to reform and make good conditions for gaming. For example, the reform of SOEs. The subsidy should be transparent. For the industrial policies, we need to have the same treatment for SOEs, private company and foreign companies. In the end, I wish a great success of the seventh China and the Globalization Forum. I'm looking forward to listening to your great ideas. Thank you. I want to thank Minister Chen Deming for your wonderful presentation. Now we will start the roundtable forum, roundtable one. The topic of the roundtable is global economic recovery views from China. The chairperson is the president of CCG, Counselor for China and State Council.
那我们今天我们的这个第一场的今天大会的第一场的圆桌，第一场的圆桌主题就是全球经济的复苏和中国的担当。As we can know that actually last year since the pandemic we really hit hard by the pandemic, and then we just.
Today is a very good start. It's a starting year for the 14th five-year plan, and we can see that the resilience of China's economy. China's world economy has contributed to the economy. In later, how we can continue to promote economic development. At the same time, we need to open up further to the world, and how we can enhance our level of anti-pandemic and guarantee the flow of human capital and goods. We need to find a new way for the economic opening up. This is what we need to consider. So this round table, we have a lot of very important discussants. We have the experts from World Bank, BRIC banks. We also have the formal senior officials from the MOFCOM and the Ministry of Finance. You can contribute around this topic. Now I would like to introduce the guests of the panelists. We know we have the Mr. Chen Deming, who is the CCG Honorable Chairman, former Minister MOFCOM, and Chairman of China Association of Enterprise. We also have Mr. Chen Jian, who is the CCG advisor, former Vice Minister of Commerce. We also have Mr. Cui Jinmo, and who is also the initiator of the forum. We will have.
Reeser. He's the World Bank Country Director for China, Mongolia, and Korea. And he's really a great economist on the situation for both China and the World Bank on economic development. 我们还有一位是这个张文才，中国农业发展银。
We also have Mr. Zhang Wencai, who is the Vice President of Agricultural Development Bank of China. We also have Mr. Zhu Guangyao. Mr. Zhu Guangyao is the former Vice Minister of Finance and the coordinator of G20 financial minister meetings. He is also the CCG advisor. We also have Mr. Zhao Bin.
那么我们想呢，这个我们的嘉宾啊，这场有这么多，还有我想我没有漏掉谁哈。这个我们还有这个来自金砖的这个。
we also have the. A speaker from the BRIC countries. Leslie Mastrop.
那么我们把这个嘉宾都介绍完了啊，我们这现在在场的。那么我想呢，这个我们可能这个时间哈，我们想大概我们能有个
we will have about 1 or 2 rounds of question and answers. The first round you can share your views, and then in the second round we may have some discussion. First, I would like to invite Mr. Chen Jian, the CCG counselor and advisor and the former vice minister of MOFCOM, to make the first presentation. My topic is the global economic recovery. It's a very good topic, I think, for the first roundtable. Current world is challenged with many problems. The first one is economy, the biggest recession after World War II. How to revitalize the global economy? This is a common challenge for everybody. 3 ways. If we can do 3 things, we can revitalize the global economy. First, investment and construction. China, in 2013, initiated the Belt and Road Vision. U.S. also proposed the Blue Dots initiative. The G7 also proposed a infrastructure plan. I think the connotation of all these plans is same. I think that the world can integrate the resources together to make infrastructure. I think there's still a gap for infrastructure around the world. Infrastructure can bring the overall economic growth. After Asian financial crisis, China was under great pressure. At that time, the government took the action of infrastructure development. So I think we need to pay special attention to this issue. China, CCG can do the thing. How Blue Dot initiative work with Belt and Road? They can work together. The G7 infrastructure, they can also cooperate with Belt and Road. The interest of humankind is aligned. If no one else talks, I think CCG can talk with the U.S. 2 resources combined together is much powerful than individual. If we can realize infrastructure development, financing and investment are two issues we need to address. All the countries are enthusiastic or active for this issue. Next step, how to find the money? There are four ways, I think. First, private PE. China has about 24,000 PEs. They are controlling about 15.9 trillion RMB. China's PEs and the PEs of other countries. We work together and make full use of this money for infrastructure, and this infrastructure will have a very promising profitability. Second way is financial leasing should be used fully as a financial tool. Now it is we are not using this tool very well. The significance of financial leasing is great for infrastructure. The third way is capital market, be it capital market in China mainland, in Hong Kong and Macau, and in the US and in the Europe. The investors of the investment capital market, they want to make money, they want return. If we place a good projects on that in the capital market, it will be popular. The fourth one is developmental financing, innovative financing instead of conventional financing. The China Development Bank has done some projects in this regard. I think you need to talk with them. Plus the traditional loans, I think with all these different methods, we can find money. At the same time, we need to have an innovative way of cooperation. We need to pay attention to the development of a region. Not just one individual project. President Xi Jinping, when talking about the Belt and the Road, mentioned a concept of point, a line, and a surface. 2 points, then if they have good project on 2 points, they can be joined as a line. Then we can consider the whole areas. I know that some companies in one areas they develop a economic belt. That's the first point I want to make. Second, digital economy. We need to pay special attention to digital economy. Digital economy will help a lot for the global economic recovery. IDC forecasts that by 2022, 60% of global GDP will come from the digital economy. According to China's Communication Institute, now China 33.3% of China's GDP comes from digital economy. I don't know how they did math, but what I'm trying to say is that the growth of digital economy will influence people's life. 5G is coming. I think we need to make full use of the digital economy, which I believe will benefit the global economy. I think you may echo my idea. The third point is technological innovation. Currently, China's technological innovation is good. However, if we need to convert the economic technology innovation into production power, into industry which will benefit the economic growth. During the technological innovation, the global economic recovery will be supported as well. What we can see is the 3 points I just mentioned. If we do that, we can do a good job. In order to attain this purpose, there are 3 hopes. First, we need to be active. Now the situation is a little bit pessimistic for people. There is no such thing as certainty. Today we have shortcomings. Today we also have advantages. We need to see the pros, not just the cons, and we need to be active in solving the problem. Second, we need to be tolerant. In the world, I have read some papers. I have listened to some international relationship experts. They all talk about problems. Behind that, there is conflicts. But lately, I have studied some issues. Some of the problems or the conflicts, they can be tolerated under certain conditions. So we have to learn to tolerate. In a tolerant world, we can realize the goal of global economic recovery. You know that I am right. We cannot just anything different from me is wrong. The world is not that simple. When I was a child. I watch a movie. I often ask my parents, "Is a good guy or bad guy?" That's a childish question. So we have to tolerate the existence of different cultures. As long as it in line with the governance demands, this kind of existence is reasonable. So the second is tolerance. The third hopes, we need to cooperate. We need to find the common points. Confrontation will be a way for humankind to consume their own resources. Only cooperation can bring benefits to humankind. That's all what I want to say. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chen Jian. Very great presentation, very forward-looking. You mentioned that the Belt and the Road and the other infrastructure projects of the world, including the B3W and other infrastructure projects. I think all of them are possibility for the economic recovery, tolerance and cooperation. All of them are keywords.
You mentioned all those good points that Belt and Road can be working with B3W and other like Euro-Asia connectivity portal proposed by EU. I think those are really great ideas. So I would like to really invite Martin Reiser, who is the head of World Bank in China, that you are really doing a lot of infrastructure, but also other projects. So can we really work together as well? I mean, I would like to hear from you. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. Cao Shanghao, unfortunately, I will have to speak in English. I think this is a great question. I want to change a little bit the perspective. I think most of the discussion on infrastructure focuses on the gap. And then once we've identified the gap, we say how big it is, X billions or trillions of dollars. And then we look around and we think about where the dollars are going to come from. And that's certainly a valuable perspective. And there's no question that if you take that perspective, China has a huge role to play because China has significant financial resources. But my perspective would be a slightly different one. Why is the money not flowing to close the gap? Why don't we have more development coming from infrastructure investments? Why is it that in countries like China, infrastructure is a driver of economic development, but in many other countries it isn't? And I think that has something to do with the quality of those investments. It has something to do with whether they're well prepared. It has something to do with whether the economic analysis behind it, the economics, justify the investment. And it has something to do with whether the risks are well balanced between the public and private sectors, and whether if the public sector takes risk and borrows for those investments, whether they have the capacity to repay them. And if the private sector finances, whether there are revenue flows that allow the private sector to recoup the money for those investments. Finally, whether environmental and social issues are adequately incorporated in the planning for those investments. These are all issues that in 40 years of partnership with China, the World Bank has put at the top of its agenda. We have seen how China has improved social and environmental standards within China. We have seen how China has improved the planning and economic analysis of infrastructure projects, and as a result, China has been a huge beneficiary of its own investment in infrastructure. This experience we now need to bring together to other countries. And it's not just enough to say, I have money. You need to say, I'm ready to build a capacity and I'm ready to adhere to these international good practice standards. So I renew the invitation to Chinese development finance institutions to join us in adhering to best international practices in financing these infrastructure investments, because that will make it possible for us to collaborate. And I think the AIIB is actually an excellent example. A lot of the projects that the AIIB finances around the world are co-financed with the World Bank or the ADB. That shows that this is possible, but it is based on a common understanding of what good standards in infrastructure development mean. Let me make two more quick points. The first is to answer a question that we were given in advance of coming to this forum, which is what additional contributions could China make to the global recovery? And I think it's really important that we see the importance of China's domestic market as an engine of growth for other countries. China has benefited hugely from global demand for Chinese products, and for much of that development, China was an export surplus country. It was an exporter of capital. And the world's largest importer of capital was the United States. Now, that cannot, that pattern has been repeated now during the pandemic. The deficit in the US has gone up and the surplus in China has gone up, partially because China was able to supply where other countries were still blocked in their supplies thanks to the pandemic. But if China wants to make a contribution to global recovery, I think it needs to look at itself as a motor of consumption and as a motor of international demand, not just for commodities that feed China's investment cycle, but also for other types of goods. I think that will serve an important purpose, particularly for many emerging markets. I think as China develops its own economy towards a greener and more sustainable path, in line with the goals set by President Xi on zero carbon by 2060. That will also provide big opportunities technologically for many other countries to learn from this. Final point that I wanted to make is on the importance of trade. We have done recent research, and this is quite recent work, to look at whether the concern that the pandemic has brought of a greater resilience, the concern that some countries have had that it might be better to bring production onshore that will make us safer, is simply not borne out by the evidence. It turns out that countries that have been more integrated into global value chains have been more resilient during the pandemic. It turns out that it makes sense for you to have a diversified range of suppliers, a diversified range of countries with which you trade, because when things go wrong, you're not just relying on one client or not on one company. But that doesn't mean that it's beneficial for you to disrupt the trade relations and bring production onshore. And so in our latest Global Economic Prospects report, which Henry, you kindly hosted a few weeks ago, we make a big important point about the potential for trade to contribute to global recovery as a result of reducing further the trade and logistics costs that are often a more important impediment than tariff barriers, and not all of which are well regulated by the WTO. A lot of these things are things that countries themselves need to do that are not part of an international framework. They're things like trade facilitation, like improving the functioning of logistics, like reducing behind-the-border barriers. And I think trade can, in that sense, can be an important engine of the global recovery, perhaps something that has been a little underemphasized in the discussion so far. So with that, let me close and thank you for the invitation.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And I think you made very good points on of course, the infrastructure investment, but also you talk about the trade. I think that's absolutely important. The trade is actually the promoter and propeller for the world economy, a big impetus. As a matter of fact, we see that from World War II as well. I mean, the whole world recovered by trade. So I think same is true probably for this time, for the pandemic. We need to really have the resilience of the trade. 那么下面呢，我想请这个朱光耀。
Now I'd like to present you Mr. Zhu Guangyao, the former Minister of the Ministry of Finance, and he used to be a member of the board of the World Bank. So Mr. Zhu Guangyao has a very insightful experience of the Chinese economy and the global economy. Mr. Zhu, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. After the pandemic, the global economy has been heavily attacked. But within these challenges, I believe that we are entered into the new stage of globalization. And while the new opportunities emerged, the COVID-19 pandemic do attack the global economy. In the year 2020, the global economic growth has been slowed down by 3.1%, and the major economies, China has maintained a growth momentum of 2.3%. Under the attack of COVID-19, working at home, remote education, online medical consultants, those we who think that it is only a subsidy for the major mainstream lifestyle is actually keeping all the society, all works of life back in its normal function. All the different countries has been accelerating their investment in the digital economy. There are 3 different major axes for the digital economy, and they are presenting 4 different policy trends. I think that we should focus on these 4 different areas, and the e-commerce, big data, cloud computing, and also artificial intelligence. And under these 3 axes, it is actually becoming the major driver and core of the digital economy, supporting the whole digital economy to be running in a rapid speed. And all the different countries in the world, while they are supporting and developing the digital economy, they have 4 different policies or policy tendencies. The first one is that they are trying their best to predict and protect the data's safety and security. All the different countries are coming up with their internal rules and regulations and laws to protect the safety of their data. We should be highly aware that until today, no single country or no single economy or no single organization in the world has come up with rule or regulations toward the digital economy's future development. In terms of the multinationalism, the European Union do have some of the general data protection regulations, but it is only a regional agreement. And globally speaking, we are in urgent need to formulate some of the rules and regulations. I think the best way is about G20. G20 is going to play a very unique role. And the second part I want to talk about is the policy preference. We need to maintain the global supply chain for its long-term resilience. And the era of digital economy, it is demonstrating a very unique meaning. COVID-19 pandemic is actually attacking the global economy, and in the supply chain, it is reflecting some of the problems. The first one is that in the supply side, there is unbalanced supply side and unbalanced production side. For example, for the digital chips, 80% of them are made in Asian countries. The second part is about the blockage of the logistics and transportations. Global trade, 80% done by the shipment, and it is actually deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have also included at the early stage of the COVID-19 pandemic, those shipment companies try their best to protect their own interest, while the global containers economy, while the containers price has been rising dramatically once the economy recovered. The blockage is happening at the transportation side. Thirdly, it reflected the anemia and the warehouse industry. It reflected to us that for those of the zero warehouse theories, we should rethink and double think it. In terms of the recoveries of the logistic supplies, first, we need to have a very good control of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this front, China is actually working at the front line of the world. And we have stabilized and controlled and prevented the spread of COVID-19 virus while we have enjoyed very good economic recoveries. And China is also playing a very stable stone effect in terms of the stabilizing the global economy. And this is also reflecting the integrations between Chinese economy and global economy. And it's also reflecting the resilience of the Chinese economy. And we have protected the supply chain to keep it at a safe, resilient manner. And this is something that we should focusing on in terms of international cooperations. The third part is about, while we are heavily curious about the ESG principles investment to the investment environment, society, and governance, is becoming one important features for investment. And this new era of digital economy, it is reflecting ever more. And fourthly, we have talked about a very unique business model, which is on the rising under the backdrop of digital economy. That is to say, the international capital has protected and invested in the intellectual property rights and also patent rights, while the international capital is actually pursuing the intellectual property and patent. And in the national-based macro policy regulations, these are some of the precursors that we should care about. And in the year 2017, the United States has come up with what they defined as a global intangible assets, the lowest assets. I think that this is a very unique and rapid formational changes, which has been reflected upon the macro government policies. In the year 2017, the Trump administration has come up with such a tool. At the time, the taxation ratio is 10.5%. It is actually equaling with the 21% of the income tax for the United States. It is like a half the interest rate. Let's look at the new taxation plans for the Biden administration. They have raised the taxation ratio to 21%, and it is actually equaling to the 28% of the United States. The ratio has been growing up and high. We should research into the new different scenarios and also the form of the business changes. This is actually the new changes brought to us. That is to say, in these 4 different policies, we need international cooperations. And in terms of the free trade theories, there is a series of the dramatic changes. Currently, the free trade theory has entered into the third stage. The first stage is stick to the trade barriers. And the trade barriers is being decided by the different countries, especially it is being featured by the extensions of the country-based taxation policies. As we enter into the second stage, we have been focusing on the multinationals' national choices for their investment. This is actually the theoretical basis. And for the multinationals, they are trying to form a very good entrepreneurial environment. And currently, we are entering into the third stage. That is to say that we are approaching this matter in a greener, and we actually should focusing on the labor relations, the fairer justice and sustainable development of all the different countries. This radical preference should be heavily cared and deeply researched by all of us. While we are developing the digital economy across the world, the globalization is going to enter into the new stage, and we need to tackle these challenges. And in this new era, we should tackle the 4 different challenges. The first one is that what we have talked about, the environmental challenges, natural disasters, pandemics and epidemics, and the second challenge is what we called the geopolitical factors. Competitions between the giants and the major powers is going to become the triggers for the geopolitical factors. Especially the international terrorism is actually affecting us. The third different challenge is that the financial crisis, the rising of the raw material is actually creating a lot of economic risk. The fourth different challenge is that under the digital economy, we should be curious about the cyber attack, especially systematic meltdowns impact on the cyber security. And these objective risks do exist, and it needs a lot of close cooperation for the international communities, and we need to form up different policies. But currently, I think that these policies are far from satisfying. The digital economy and globalization is going to be one major trend for the world, but the difficulties facing in front of us do exist and cannot be addressed over one night. It needs the close collaboration between the international society to tackle with the different challenges, and we are going to let the globalization to work on a path for healthy development. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhu Guangyao, for your exciting sharings, and you have given us a lot of points. You have emphasized the importance of digital economies, big data, artificial intelligence, and moving forward. We are going to be affected by the international digital economies, and how do we keep up with further development, including how do we build up a supply chain with a better resilient. We've been talking about taxations. Under the Trump administration, and recently, I have heard that the G7 and also the G20 has surpassing the lowest taxation ratio for the company. And after in the Biden administration, the global lowest taxation ratios for the multinationals has been signed up by 130 different countries and regions, and China is one of them. It is going to be one of the major signs for this year. And for example, in the Hainan province of China and also in Hong Kong, we have fine-tuning the VAT ratio by 50%, and moving forward, it is going to lower down the gap between the rich and the poor, and this is also going to help us and to mimic the globalizations and also the anti-globalization tide. It is also going to enable China to be excused by the name of the scapegoat to become the taxation havens. And when we have speak of the fortunes, we have some of the experts from the World Banks, we have some of the experts from the Ministry of Finance. Now I'd like to present to you the Deputy Director of China Agricultural Development Banks, Mr. Zhang Wencai. Mr. Zhang Wencai, the floor is yours.
So distinguished guests, good morning. I used to work in Ministry of Finance, doing the job of international cooperation. I worked in AID, NDB, World Bank, ADB, doing the same job. What I'm going to talk about is for the current pandemic and after pandemic, how we are going to recover the economy, and how we are going to deal with the climate change, how we can mobilize resources for these challenges, how to promote the technology transfer and the capacity building. First thing I want to talk about international financing. We are facing a big financial gap. The development financing has been talked for many years, since the last century. Still, for sustainable development, we are still facing huge financial gap for poverty alleviation, for UN development agenda goals, for peak carbon neutrality. So for all these causes, we are facing huge financial resources. There was gap for infrastructure, for climate. Money is needed everywhere. So we haven't find a solution for these issues. We talk about the future, in future, how we can mobilize the public-private resources. For public, be it government, international financial institutions, policy banks of different countries, development banks of different countries, commercial banks of different countries, we can do our job. But how to mobilize the private funds through capital market, bond market, stock market, how we can mobilize the private capitals. There are lots of private companies waiting for bankable projects. On the other hand, how we can place the projects into the capital market to have a good matchmaking, how we can organize a lot of good PPP projects. I used to work in Asian Development Bank. I found that it's not that easy. PPP sounds good, but how to design, how to execute, that's a difficult job. So it is still a huge challenge for mobilizing the public-private funds. We have today colleagues from international financial organizations. We all talk about it. Second, we need to have good partnership. We need to have the banks from different countries and the international organization all providing money. I worked in the Agriculture Development Bank. Last year, for pandemic fighting, for economic recovery, we have placed about 300 billion US dollars, which is larger than the annual placement of fund. So what I'm trying to say is that the countries institute, how they can work with international organizations, can do like the joint financing. There should be cooperation between international organizations as well. Like when you worked in ADB, we ask cooperation with World Bank, with NDB. There should be joint financing between international organizations. No one institution can provide all the money. So in future, we need to find different channels. We need to promote the partnerships. We need to promote the private-public cooperation and different kind of the partnership. Developing countries should also improve their environment. Also need to cultivate their own private market, capital market. So in future, international aid system, developed countries should provide more resources for developing countries. This is an old topic, but still it's relevant in today's time. In future, we have to find money. This is a huge gap. The second view is, when we talk about the money, we also need to think about the technology, capacity building needed by developing countries. Money is not enough. Martin said, when you provide money, whether you can have a very high standard in terms of the environment, social governance, I think what he's talking about is that our project need to find the money, but this project should be sustainable. They can bring jobs. It can bring the income for the areas where the project is located. So while financing, we need to promote the transfer of technology. We need to build up the capacity as well. For example, for climate change, we need money and the technology. Some developing countries, they need to have the clean technology. They need technology to enhance the efficiency of the energy. Money is not enough. They cannot use money without technology to reduce the emission. The design of the projects, the management of the project, the high standard of infrastructure, they all need the good ideas. They need to use the high standard. I think that knowledge, technology transfer, all of these issues should be talked about by international organizations, by countries, banks. The third view I want to talk about is about future trend of globalization. I think globalization cannot be reversed, but how to promote it fast? After pandemic, we cannot, the globalization cannot be stopped. One country, for example, want to stop the link between industries. I think that's not possible. No one can do anything that is against the rule of the market. No one can talk about decoupling that easy. A cooperation pattern cannot be just a split. Without a good division of labor, all the members of the international community will suffer. So we have to promote the convenience of the investment. We started the journey of globalization since last century. We need to sum up what are the lessons, what are the experiences, and after learning this knowledge, we can make the future globalization sustainable, balanced, and mutually beneficial. So how? Working with each other, by coordinating with each other, by dialogue, we can solve the barriers to have sustainable with orderly movement of the production factors, labors, digital assets, and all these things we need to think about. So we need to do policy dialogue. We all need to participate in the rule making to guarantee the orderly flow of the resources. Then we can have a open, inclusive global pattern. This is an important task facing us. So this is what I want to share with you. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, Governor Zhang, for your great ideas. You work in the Asian Development Bank and many other banks. Your suggestion is very good. Economic development, global pandemic fighting, but the experienced bank can do that, like World Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, American Development Bank. They got a lot of experience. So it is a very good partnership among them. Besides trade, investment is also an important pillar for the bank.
Between the banks, we also have another bank, senior bank representative with us today is Leslie with us, Mastrop. He's the Vice President and the Chief Financial Officer of a new development bank, which is composed of all the BRICS countries that form this bank. Actually, they're going to have a new head office in Shanghai going to be inaugurated very soon. So, Leslie, I would like to hear your point on how we can, build this resilient globalization and through all the efforts, including the banks.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the invitation to be here. I'd like to start and reinforce a point made by Minister Chen Deming in his remarks earlier on, that the COVID-19 pandemic reinforced the important role that multilateral institutions can and should play during periods of crises. We know that the G20, the multilateral banks, the IMF all responded with significant speed, I would say, in dealing with the crisis in around March, April 2020. But I would also assert that in terms of scale, that the multilateral institutions have really failed to come to the party in terms of the scale required. And we can go later on and have a little bit more closer look at the numbers. But there are a lot of studies now. There's a recent scholar from Center for Globalisation and Development, Nancy Lee, who made a comparison of the responses of 2008-2009 financial crisis, the scale of that crisis, how institutions injected fresh liquidity into the global system, and comparing that to 2020. And there seems to be an emerging consensus that given the size of the economic dislocation from COVID, that a lot more should have and still needs to be done to get the world economy out of the current crisis. So I guess the point is that we need to reboot our global institutions to respond to crises of this nature, because by design, we are set up to be counter-cyclical in nature. The next point I would like to make is that the development agenda has really experienced a significant setback. The World Bank, with the most authoritative numbers, have suggested that more than 150 million people have and are moving into extreme poverty. So we are very much moving backwards in terms of our scheduled commitments for the 2030 global agenda. What this implies, Mr. Chairman, I would argue, is that there's a fresh need to look at how to reboot the system, how to reboot, for example, development finance. Could we do more with our existing capital? Is it possible within the confines of our risk limits, within the confines of our financial metrics, to increase our lending headroom? In this regard, there are quite a few very exciting initiatives underway. You might know that 3 years ago, in 2018, the G20 appointed an eminent persons group which came up with a series of suggestions of what could be done to reboot the development finance system. And some of these ideas are now captured in the Italian presidency of the G20 currently underway, including asking the multilateral banks to significantly increase their lending headroom via some balance sheet optimization measures. The next point I'd like to make, and this again is a bit of self-criticism on the multilateral institutions. Many of our countries in BRICS, for example, India, South Africa, Brazil, we are still ravaged by COVID. And if you look at our responses, way back, and I remember this very, very vividly because I was in South Africa at the time, when the heads of MDBs met in the early parts of March, April last year. We did not collaborate in the manner required, for example, around vaccine research, around vaccine production, around vaccine distribution, because the poorest of the poor, the poorer developing countries, were the worst hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the global pandemic, as you know, is a classic public good. It is a challenge that you can only solve everywhere. If you solve it somewhere, you can solve it everywhere. So what this reminds us again is the importance of greater coordinated efforts and greater collaboration, because this was when the system was the most tested, I would argue, and it seems to me at least that we have not fully come to the party. The next point I would like to make, and this is more the optimistic side, that it seems that the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened our awareness of the urgency to deal with climate change. Over the last year, The most significant development obviously has been us, all the countries rather, most countries in the world now having adopted net zero targets. And I would like to argue that China has a very specific, or rather very unique role to play in the quest for net zero. Now, I say that for three reasons. Firstly, as you know, China contributes 28% of global emissions. Secondly, China has already demonstrated over the last 5 years, it has demonstrated the fastest reduction in emission intensity. And also because, as you know, President Xi Jinping announced the 2060 carbon net zero target, but more significantly have announced 2030 as the date for peak emissions. Because of the scale of the carbon intensity of this economy, China has a very special role to play. Another reason why I believe China has got a unique role to play is because it has already demonstrated how, through its leadership in the regulatory space, in the evolution of the green bond market, is one case in point. When I arrived in China in 2015, when we set up the new development bank, the green bond market hardly existed. Today, China is one of the largest green bond markets in the world, and the green bond market globally is now reaching over $1 trillion, or $1.2 trillion. So through very decisive policy leadership, very clear direction and leadership from the regulatory institutions, you can see how that coordinated effort have led to significant advances in generating new finances for green energy and developing the green finance market. The final point that I would like to make is again a point that several speakers already made, is the potential to tap into new technology in this quest for net zero. There is no question that sustainability has the potential, at least, for it to become a source of comparative advantage for companies. So this is no longer an imposition where companies have to look at how are they going to repurpose their business models to become net zero, but they can actually make it a sustainable advantage. And one of the encouraging signs here, I would argue, some of the leading global CEOs, Larry Fink, for example, who's the CEO of BlackRock, one of the largest companies in the world, with asset managers with over $8 trillion under management, have argued that they now see climate risk as the #1 risk in looking at investment risk. What this suggests is that increasingly the valuations of companies will be impacted upon very directly by their emissions footprint. I'm therefore suggesting that as sustainability become a leading aspect of comparative advantage, this will be, as it's reflected in companies' valuations, it will become mainstream. And therefore, the final point I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, is that the COP26, it seems to us, certainly from our analysis, is likely going to lead to a very decisive and historic turning point in the world. It is very likely that post-COP26, after November this year, there will be much stronger push from regulators across the world to start to converge in terms of their standards around sustainability and to inject fresh momentum into this objective of reaching carbon neutrality. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. I mean, you mentioned a lot of points. I think Zhou was pursuing, particularly, I think now, carbon neutrality and the carbon peak would be actually another big opportunities for turning the world economy into a great direction. Next,
we have the SOE bank speaks. Now I would like to invite a representative from the multinational companies, Mr. Zhao Bin, from the court, from a multinational company perspective. What's your view about China's economic growth?
Thank you very much, Director Wang, respectable Minister Chen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank CCG for kindly inviting me to attend today's meeting. So I am here and really honored to see so many distinguished guests. On one side, it's actually demonstrating the great impact of CCG, and it's also setting up the attractions of the topic that we have set up today. All the distinguished leaders before me has made a very high leading speech, and please allow me, as I am representing the Qualcomm in the United States, to discuss with you our perspective of sustainable development and from the multinational perspective. And I am kindly invite you for your corrections. I agree with all of your ideas and opinions, and a few different points is going to be repeated, overlapped during my speech. I have also mentioned about the industrial development. This is also going to provide them a real-time case for all of them. Speaking of globalization, my idea is that globalization is something self-evident because the world we are currently living in cannot be divided. The global supply chain and the industrial chain is almost as one industrial chain and supply chain. Moving to the next stage, it is going to be the digital industrializations and also the industrial digitalization, as all the leaders mentioned. While I think globalization is going to be an inevitable trend and supporting system for all of them. Just let me use the telecommunications and integrated circuit industry that I am working in. All the different telecommunication industry needs to be interconnected. That is to say, they need to have one standards. That is to say, all the different manufacturers, R&D centers, and also the operators needs to work under one standards. And from the industrial development to the general rules, it needs a unique development according to BCG's latest researching report. The integrated circuit industry is becoming one of the heavily invested industry in the world. It needs the highest global cross-region cooperations. No single one country can rely on themselves to be working in the semiconductor industry and grab all the different core technologies. Let's assume that all the different participants of every single country that they can build their own supply chain. It is going to raise the price of the semiconductors by 35% to 65%, and finally it is going to impact the consumers, the final end consumers, and hurt the whole economic development. That's the reason why I think globalization is an inalienable part. It is also a way to work to cut down the cost. Speaking of global economic recovery, I think that we should have absolute confidence that although after the development of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing a cross-region dilemma or challenge in the production, logistic development, and also warehouse development. Definitely, it is actually demonstrating the huge impact on the global supply chain. It is indicating once again that globalization is becoming a necessity for all the different industries. At the same time, COVID-19 is still wreaking havoc across the world while bringing up the new opportunities. Definitely, these new opportunities are going to be very beneficial for the whole and overall economic recovery. For example, some of the leaders have mentioned about the development of the logistics industry, and also the Internet of Things has also reformed in an unprecedented manner. I think most of you who are sitting here has a lot of time to work at home during the COVID-19 pandemic. You still need to be connected to the company and to the client through a remote internet, no matter you are working in the retail industries, working in the consumption industry, or the normal business. That is to say, to some extent, the IoT has accelerated the digitalization economy. This is also going to promote the whole economic recovery. That is also The digitalization is also a trend where my company excels at. We also want to serve the whole economy using our own technology and know-how. The Qualcomm, as a multinational, we have stick to our presence in China. We believe that it is going to be one necessary step in terms of our international display. We have always stick to that. We are deep-rooted in China, and we are going to be innovative in the Chinese market. And we are also going to promote the innovation in China. And innovation, as we mentioned, is going to be one major driver for the economic recovery. Definitely, our innovation in China, for one part, is going to be working together with all of our Chinese partners and our mutual support. From last year, many of our Chinese partners and their global business growth is even higher than their internal domestic growth rate. So we are quite proud of the result. That is actually the Qualcomm's best example of our global practice. We hope that we could also facilitate China's dual circulation economy. We believe that the Chinese or U.S. companies' stronger business tie is definitely going to be a very important change maker in the China-U.S. diplomatic relations. We hope also to use our specialties to contribute our fair shares to the new infrastructures in the globalization trend. Definitely, I think that I should give you some of the recent examples to prove the theories that I was talking about. As a demonstration for our company's contribution to the world. In the past 1 year, the total work number of staff member of our company has grown by 25%. Under extreme difficulties, the Qualcomm has already grown our staff number by 25%, creating a lot of jobs for the global economy. And I think all of you know that our company has been focusing on the circular economy. We don't have the manufacturer, but in the recent few years, we have set up the testing factories and also the sealing factories. Especially in the May this year, we have set up a secondary factory in the Wuxi city of China, and we invested for 2 billion RMB. And we believe that this real investment is demonstrating our long-term determination and confidence and commitment to the further development of the Chinese market. This is also going to be beneficial to our Qualcomm's global presence and our strategic development. And in May this year, and in the Water Cup, Qualcomm has been working together with 120 different partners and suppliers, and we are demonstrating around 300 different technologies. And we demonstrate these 300 different technologies. We believe 5G as a platform-like technology, it is going to facilitate so many different industries to develop further. Definitely, apart from some of the recent development and recent business practice, we have also conducted a long-term risk investment. In the past 4 years, we have invested in several dozens of the Chinese innovative companies and startups. The Qualcomm's Foundation has totally invested over 70 different companies. We invested in Xiaomi, Zhongke Chuangda, and also Mobike, and also the Shangtang Technologies. We have supported Chinese overall development in the artificial intelligence, 5Gs, Internet of Things, intelligent connected vehicles. We believe that Qualcomm, with so many different patented 5G technology, it is not only going to help us and empower the smart end industries, and we are also going to help the smart transportations, and we are also going to accelerate the rapid development of the Chinese digital economies. We are going to bring more certainty to this world of uncertainties, and it is going to be we are going to be a very important stabilizer in the science and tech world. Just as the minister has mentioned, high-tech companies like us really cares about the intellectual properties. Intellectual property is our lifeline and core competitiveness. Across the world and even in China, we have practiced the general innovations and we share the fruitions of our innovations, and we hope the frontline technologies could empower the general economic development. And we are also going to use the advanced cutting-edge technologies to promote the systematic development. So that's the reason why we are calling for all the different Chinese companies to improve the general intellectual property environment. And at the same time, we hope that in the Chinese government, we could gain more support. As a multinational, we hope that we could get more positive media exposures. We could see that in the past few years, the Chinese government is actually promoting the law-based ruled countries, and the Chinese government has made a lot of effort, and it has created a very beneficial and positive image. We hope the Chinese government could do more effort and work to let the foreign invested companies to be benefited from the policy making and also policy implementations. And this is going to boost the confidence for foreign invested companies. And we are going to be a very helpful force in the economic recovery in the Chinese economy. That concludes my speech. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao Bing. Mr. Zhao Bing is the Global VP for Qualcomm, and this is also a very exciting speech demonstrating the huge potential for the foreign invested company. We all understand the foreign invested companies, their registrations in China, they have paid the taxations in China, and they are actually create jobs in China. They are a Chinese company. I believe this is for the China and globalization trend. The foreign invested company has made a very big shares of the contributions. I know that Mr. Cui Wenbo is actually the head of the Ministry of Commerce, the International Economic Exchange Center. So, Mr. Chen, would you like to speak a few words? I have heard so many different speeches for the leaders and also for the different experts. I am deeply inspired. So, just as Mr. Wang Huiyao has mentioned, this is a forum jointly launched by the CCG and also the Ministry of Commerce. And this year marks the 7th year anniversary. I feel that for each one of the year, this forum has promoted the globalization development, and it actually plays ever more bigger roles. That is the reason why, because I'm not going to elaborate further, but I think one sentence from the bottom of my heart is that I want to congratulate for the successful openings of these 7th China and Globalization Forums. I really hope that all of you, all the distinguished leaders, all the distinguished guests, could contribute the futures to the globalization trend for China and for the world, and to give you some of the insights. I think that we are going to join our hands to work harder for the sustainable development of globalizations. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much, Mr. Chen, for your yearly support in the MAFCON. And you are actually a governmental officials in the global commerce landscape. So, Mr. Chen, would you like to give us a wrap-up toward the first roundtable discussion? We have talked about the economic recovery from the economist perspective, trade perspectives, the basic infrastructure corporations, and also multinationals, the collaborations between the international and domestic banks. So the floor is yours, Mr. Chen, Minister Chen. I heard all of your speech. I am deeply moved. I learned a lot from the different perspective. You talk about globalizations. It helps me with a lot. For example, just as Mr. Zhu Guangyao has mentioned, you talk about digital economy. Digital economy is actually a new topic in WTA, but we cannot reach a consensus in WTO. There are so many reasons behind it. And because across the world, there is no single direction that we are moving together toward. And you have also mentioned about the GDPR. That is a rule, and that is a regulation in the European Union. So where can we borrow and learn from the GDPR? And where are some of the practices that we cannot be acceptable in the Chinese market? We have also listened to the opinions from the United States. I have asked my colleague in the European Union, and I asked them that, do you think, apart from the Europe, any other countries is actually approaching or understand the GDPR standards? They told me it's Japan. As a representative from the Foreign Invested Companies Association, I've been talking with many different Chinese companies. If we want to enter into the European market, we need to accept the GDPR. It is going to be a global regulations. I also think that Mr. Chen Deming, the former deputy director of the MOFCOM, has mentioned about the infrastructure support. This is also very important. We are really willing to create a scenario, create a case, create a law and regulation where we can discuss and work together with other different developing countries, the United States, Japan, and Europe. This is not only an urgent demand of some of the countries. These countries need the support. And during the poverty relief campaign in China, we have built some of the remote countries and lifted some of the remote regions out of the poverty. I'm not only talking about railways, highways, and also bridges. We also talk about the internet connections and also the virtual economies. In so many regions across the world, it needs the joint collaborations and needs the concerns of the developing countries and help from the developing countries. And by practicing like this is not only going to enable their economies to develop, this is also going to enable us to get a huger global economic market for the different countries. We are actually facing with a series of problems, including the overproductivities, and our economy is also going to be trapped in middle income gap. But we should not only leave aside the ideology and social systems. We should keep up with the one international rules and regulations to look into these sides. I think that the representatives from Mr. Zhao Bing from the Qualcomm has really give us some of the insights and actually cases, because Qualcomm is a very important contributor to the Chinese digital economy development, but Qualcomm has always stick to their high-tech development, and they are a global leader in the telecommunication and the 5G industry. We are in urgent needs to work together with U.S. companies like them. Definitely, the external environment is not very beneficial, especially for those foreign invested companies. Some of the FDI foreign invested companies want to leave Chinese market, but some of them are still watching. Their Chinese investment is under a huge pressure in their domestic market. They do make money in China. They want to stick to the Chinese business, but they hope that China could give them a better environment in terms of the intellectual property protections, and in some of the estimated perspective, they could get more support. So to be frankly, lands taxations is about to reach its ceilings, and I think that this is not going to be the major attraction for foreign investment. I think the intellectual property rights, the respect for talents, is going to be the major focus for the multinationals. In the recent few days, I've been asking that why there are some fluctuations in the stock markets. Is the fluctuations in the stock market only for a temporary fluctuation? I think that this is something that we should care about and concerns. I've been no longer minister again, and recently I've been teaching some of the courses for Tsinghua University and also the Nanjing University. I think the traditional globalizations is actually at a new crossroads, and it is very difficult for us to continue the journey. It is not only about the globalization, it is about the globalization governance. Because of the postponement of the globalizations, for decades of these globalizations, even after the Second World War,
There were 4 periods for the globalization. After the 4 sessions, humankind accumulates a lot of wealth, but the distribution of the wealth is not fair. Some countries, some regions got more. Some countries, some regions got less. The low income, the blue collar, got less. So because of this insufficient governance, there is a growth of the very narrow populism. So the globalization is a historic trend, but it is not always smooth. There will be twists and turns. Of course, globalization will move on. The good news is that in this digitalized world, in this area, in this time of technology growing, all the technology are pointing to one fact that the world need cooperation. For example, our exploration into the deep space, our exploration into the center of the earth. No one country, even United States, cannot finish by itself. Humankind has to work together, so globalization cannot stop. But if we don't have good governance, the nationalism, the populism will hinder the globalization. That's why we say the globalization is in a very delicate crossroad. Some developed countries' ministers ask me why China benefit from the globalization, but I said no. U.S. benefit from the globalization the most, but the investment, the flow of factors make the flow of capital and the technology better, but less for the flow of the land and the policy. The emerging companies, they benefit, they get more benefit. Then the balance has been stressed, has been broken. We need to have a new balance. China is a big country with 1.4 billion. Our market growth is growing less than the economic growth. Then you can see that last year, domestic consumption was bigger or at least the same with the U.S. And in future, we will introduce, digest, and import the goods from other countries. That will be our long-term policy. So I think globalization, we need to have confidence, we need to have patience for globalization, we need to tolerance it counts, and we need to deal with its shortcomings and to make globalization moving forward with a better track. This track will be supported by digital technology, by the high tech. But if we can realize this point, we will be confident. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your wonderful summary up. I think the Roundtable 1 is very successful. All of you have shared a good experience. So I think this is a very good beginning for today's conference. I want to thank 8 panelists. Today we will have more wonderful roundtables. The next roundtable will be a Ambassador Roundtable, which has become a brand for our CCG Forum. And we will take 10 minutes break. After 10 minutes, we will come back. And let's take a photo and wrap up the first roundtable. Thank you.